It always sat kind of ill with me when it came to the age of Aisha, but I recently saw a Muhammad Hijab interview, and he mentioned that accepting the age of Aisha and the marriage to Aisha isn't required to be a Muslim. So
those arguments against it or to criticize it in any shape or form, they don't stand up at all.
when it comes to that age, is there cases where someone has reached the age of puberty at that age, like at 9 or?
This NHS website talking about early or delayed puberty, and it says that
Why don't they make those assertions about their great-great-granddad?
Right.
Why don't they go back to their family tree and find out their uncles and their aunts who married at 9, 10, and 11 years old? Why don't they do that?
It always sat kind of ill with me when it came to the age of Aisha. And I'm sure you guys have gotten this a million times. But I recently saw a Muhammad Hijab interview with someone named Sneeko, who's like an influencer. And he mentioned that accepting the age of Aisha and the marriage to Aisha isn't required to be a Muslim. So I wanted to get your view on that. And if that's not relevant to this, then I can move on to a different question.
It's difficult to comment on somebody else's comment because context, how they said, why they said it, whether they explained it, elaborated on it. Very, very difficult to basically to sort of really to say anything specific.
Understood.
But the fact is that the hadith that we have is from Aisha radiallahu anha herself, and she gives her age, and there's no reason for us to basically debate or doubt that. I just think, really, to be honest, even if you look at it at a very cursory glance and level, it's not controversial at all. It's just been made controversial, but it really doesn't. The arguments do not. Those arguments against it or to criticize it in any shape or form, they don't stand up at all. Yeah. They don't stand up from a historical point of view. They don't stand up from a religious point of view. They don't stand up from studying psychology or sociology. It doesn't stand up on or stack up on any of these things.
It's a good point. If
Saracen,
I could,
did you contact Brother Hijab?
No, I tried. I tried contacting quite a few people, but I think maybe I get lost in there.
I think you send him an email, because there are because you see, it's very, like, I agree. We don't know what was said, how it was said, what was meant. In this, so to say that something isn't required for you to be a Muslim, a Muslim, you have to testify that there's nothing worthy of worship except for Allah, and you have to have the 5 pillars,
right,
and have the testimony of the 6 pillars of Iman. None of those 6 pillars of Iman are the age of Aisha. Do you understand? True. So it depends on the context of so it's very easy to look at this and say, actually, depending on how he said it and what it was being meant, this is quite a reasonable thing to say. There's a whole other thing. Are you rejecting all of this, or that's a different thing entirely? So we're not in a place to make a comment about another conversation that someone's had, and I haven't watched the sneak interview. So what I would suggest is go and just contact him and ask him, and it's because the problem, there's the main issue here for an individual is why does it bother you? Why is the age of Aisha bothering you?
Right.
If it does bother you. And then it's irrelevant what anyone else says. So if you're thinking, oh, this is my get out clause, I can, because there are people who argue against the age of Aisha being as recorded in Bukhari, etc., and they have their valid positions and they hold those positions. Do you understand?
Yeah. So I guess
it's not like, it's not a hill to die on. If you understand what I mean. Yeah. This is not the battle that is going to be all of the battles that you need to hold on and fight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what both of you guys have said makes a lot of sense. So one of the things too, to just add to Abbas's point, is you're right. Historically, the consistency is like, the age of 10 in the United States was the age of marital consent. When it comes to a word that I won't say on this podcast, let's just say people who are attracted to children in a very bad way, that's outside of marriage that you'll see that becomes a huge problem, whereas historically within marriage it wasn't as big of an issue. So I wanted to ask Imran something from his medical background and being someone who's very educated in Islam too, as mashallah, is that when it comes to that age, is there cases where someone has reached the age of puberty at that age, like at 9 or?
Yeah, so the puberty is a range.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. There's no like one age. So puberty is a range, and the range is from 9 upwards, and it goes up to about 14. And in boys, it's a little bit later, a couple
Amazing.
of years later. In fact, there's a condition called precocious puberty, which is early puberty. I wouldn't say unnatural, but early in the sense that it's earlier than we would expect it, and that's usually sort of treated in some way. Because one of the things that happens with puberty is you get a height growth, and if some girls get a very early puberty, their height is restricted. So one of the things you might want to do is help to delay that so that they actually gain a greater height. So the range is from 9 onwards. So if a young girl came into A&E with abdominal pain and she was 9 or above, then one of the things you would do is a pregnancy test, because it's on your list of differentials of what could be possibly wrong. Do you understand? So this is well within normal physiology for that to be the case. And depending on the climate, it's more likely. So a hotter climate, for example, you're more likely to come into puberty early. Greater calorific intake, you're more likely to come into puberty early. So this is not an unusual thing at all. It's perfectly natural in that sense. So yeah,
that's subhanAllah. So okay, I'm going to tell everybody who's listening right now, this is why it's important to call in with these questions, because if you look this up, which I've tried to do, you'll get a lot of propaganda, right? If you ask a doctor who's also knowledgeable about Islam, I never knew this, Dr. Imran. I've looked into it. What I've found a lot of was like, kind of like, what is it? I guess you could say like NGOs or those types of organizations, like human rights organizations, arguing against quote unquote child marriage and stuff. They never gave the explanations that you're giving, right? So if you go on Google, it's very hard to find what Dr. Imran's saying because it's caked in pages of propaganda. So to hear this from Dr. Imran is awesome. I never knew this before. That 9. So you said that the starting age is 9 onward.
Yeah. So 9 onwards. Let me just share something, because there's one thing to talk about, because the criteria isn't just puberty. So I don't want you to go away with the impression that the criteria is puberty. That's not it. But you asked the question: is puberty? Does it happen at that time? So let me give you some. So let me just show you something. So this is this is an NHS website. Let me just get rid of this NHS website talking about early or delayed puberty, and it says that. I hope you guys, can you read this?
Yeah. I can see it just fine.
Okay, great. Let me just. Says puberty is when a child's body begins to develop and change as they become an adult, and it talks about the signs, and it says the average age, average now, not the range, but the average age of puberty is 11 in girls. It's older in boys, as I mentioned. It's perfectly normal for puberty to begin at any point between 8 and 13 in girls. They put here. Now, I would say, from my learning, anyone who's under that age is precocious puberty. So. Here they say, but if it's a good idea to speak to your general practitioner if it starts before 8 and it has not started by around 14. So is 9 within this range? Yes. So it's not even a question about that. The question isn't about that. It's the reason it's raised is because of the current conditioning. Consent. Yeah, the social conditioning is you have to be 18. Although we know there's so much underage pregnancies, etc., happening over the country, STIs. We're handing out sort of contraceptives to young children in schools to prevent this sort of pandemic of underage pregnancies. So that's not really the issue. The issue we're dealing with is something else, is a psychological state about when one should get married and when one should have intercourse, based upon our current culture and society. And it's quite a delayed time now. It's 18 or above, and even you meet some 18-year-olds and you think that this person can't handle marriage in the sense that they're not socially, trained enough. And if you go back in time, people who were not, had formal school educations, etc., they were functioning as adults within the society at a much earlier age. But I don't want you to go away with the impression that it's just about puberty. It's not. There's more factors, but that's one of them.
And I think, Imran, the interesting thing here is that a lot of these haters that make these assertions about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, why don't they make those assertions about their great-great-granddad? Right. Why don't they go back to their family tree and find out their uncles and their aunts who married at 9, 10, and 11 years old? Why don't they do that? Why don't they call them the sort of slurs and the names and the derogatory things and from their own family, their own ancestry? Because the reality is, if you go back a few hundred years, it wasn't about, people didn't even know their birthdays. They didn't even have birth certificates. if your girl reached puberty and the parents deemed her to be physically and psychologically mature enough to marry, they got her married. That's how it happened. People didn't have birth certificates. They didn't even know how old they were. Often, it was sort of a guesswork. And even in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before the Islamic calendar, people would basically say it was 2 years after such and such battle, or 3 years after the elephants came to destroy Mecca, or it was 5 years after this, or 4 years before this. This is how they would remember things, because people didn't have calendars. They didn't have dates like that.
Right.
And the other thing is that there are some people quite prominent as well. I know Sheikh Uthman, for example, he argues that age is higher, and he gives lots of evidences as to why he feels the age is much higher. Nobody says that he's become, na'uzubillah, a disbeliever, and therefore he's outside of the fold of Islam because he's come up with a different view based on some other evidences or whatever. That's his view. He's entitled to that view. That does not, as Imran said, it does not clash with the fundamentals and the foundations of our belief. And so, but it's really, I find it, as I say, the issue itself has only been brought up because they can't attack Islam.
Mm-hmm.
They can't attack the Quran unless they start lying and manipulating and saying all sorts of untruths about it. So they have to go after the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's all they have. But even when they try that strategy, as soon as you start opening up the subject and explaining it, it's just a non-argument, quite frankly.